Come, let us close our eyes and drift back to a place of quiet, clinical horror, a place that was meant to be a nursery for gods, but became a kennel for monsters. Let us sleep in the rainbow room, a place where a child's colorful drawing on a wall was just a thin layer of paint over a concrete tomb. This is the story of that room, of the man who built it, and of the children who haunted its halls long before any monster from another dimension ever stepped through a wall. The history of Hawkins' lab is not a story of a single sudden catastrophe. It is a story of a slow, creeping rot, a dream of control that curdled day by quiet day into a waking nightmare. The story of the Rainbow Room begins not with a rainbow, but with a shadow. The shadow of the Cold War, a time of profound national paranoia and boundless scientific ambition. It was an era where the line between patriotism and monstrosity was dangerously blurred, and in this gray, morally ambiguous space, a man named Dr. Martin Brenner found his purpose. Brenner was not a sadist in the traditional sense. He was a true believer. He was a scientist of the mind, a pioneer on a new invisible frontier. He looked at the human psyche not as a source of poetry or love, but as an untapped arsenal, a psychic weapon of unimaginable power that, if unlocked, could secure America's dominance for a century. He was a man of soft words and hard, unyielding convictions. He saw himself not as a jailer, but as a father, a shepherd, guiding his very special flock towards a great and terrible destiny. His early work was under the umbrella of the now infamous Project MK Ultra, a real CIA program dedicated to the study of mind control. He conducted his experiments on the fringes of society, on college students, on psychiatric patients, on unwitting volunteers who thought they were participating in a simple sleep study. He used a potent cocktail of psychedelic drugs, sensory deprivation, and psychological manipulation to try and crack open the doors of perception. He was looking for a key, a specific genetic marker or a psychological trait that would lead him to the next stage of human evolution. He found many dead ends, many minds that he broke without finding what he was looking for. He needed a new kind of subject, a mind that was not yet fully formed, a blank slate upon which he could write his own commands. He needed children. His search led him to a young, idealistic woman named Terry Ives. She was a participant in his program in the late 1960s, a girl looking for a little extra cash and a way to be part of something bigger. She was, to Brenner, just another variable in his grand equation. But she was a unique variable. Unbeknownst to him at first, she was pregnant. The drugs they administered to Terry, the hours she spent floating in the silent, dark abyss of a sensory deprivation tank, had a profound and unforeseen effect. The chemical and psychic assault didn't just affect her. It resonated with the developing consciousness within her womb. Her unborn daughter, Jane, was marinating in a soup of hallucinogens and psychic exploration. Her brain, in its most crucial stage of development, was being fundamentally rewired, imprinted with the very abilities Brenner had been so desperately trying to create artificially. From his cold, scientific perspective, it was a miracle. He had stumbled upon the perfect incubator. The birth was a masterpiece of clinical, bureaucratic cruelty. Brenner and his team orchestrated a seamless deception. They told Terry she had miscarried in her third trimester, a tragic but not uncommon event. They created a paper trail, a fiction of a stillborn child, burying the truth under layers of forged documents and medical lies, while Terry was sent home to a life that would be consumed by a grief that slowly sharpened into an unshakable, obsessive conviction that her daughter was alive. The real Jane was taken. She was spirited away into the deepest, most secure levels of Hawkins National Laboratory, her existence erased from the world. She was no longer Jane Ives. She was a project. She was an asset. And she was given a new name, a designation that would define the first chapter of her life, 011. But she was not the first. Before her, before all the others who would follow, there was another child, a boy whose darkness would become the seed from which Brenner's entire monstrous garden would grow. The true genesis of the Hawkins lab program, the dark Big Bang that created its universe of pain, was the arrival of a boy named Henry Creel. In 1959, long before Terry Ives ever stepped foot in the lab, Henry was brought to Dr. Brenner not as a subject to be created, but as a phenomenon to be studied. He was Brenner's patient zero, a naturally occurring psychic of immense, terrifying power. Henry's story began in a stately, deceptively beautiful home in Hawkins, where his family had moved seeking a fresh start from the lingering trauma of his father's time in the war. But Henry was not a normal boy. He was born with a profound sense of alienation, a deep and abiding contempt for the hypocrisy and chaos of the human world. He saw the lies behind his parents' forced smiles, the rot beneath the floorboards of their perfect suburban life. He found solace not in people, but in spiders, in their quiet, deadly, and perfect sense of order. It was in that house that his powers began to manifest. He could see into the past. He could move things with his mind, and he could project his consciousness into the minds of others. He began to see himself not as a boy, but as a predator, a superior being destined to bring a new, truer order to the world. His family became his first experiment. He tormented them with illusions, with visions of their deepest fears, a form of righteous punishment for their flawed humanity. This culminated in a single, horrific night where he used his powers to grotesquely murder his mother and sister, breaking their bones with his mind, an act of purification that pushed his young body into a coma. His father, Victor, who was trapped in a vision during the murders, was blamed for the crime and locked away in an asylum, a man driven mad by a truth no one would ever believe. Henry, in his coma, was brought to Brenner. And Brenner, a man who had been searching for a spark of this power his entire life, found himself face to face with a psychic inferno. He was awed, and he was terrified. He revived Henry and began to study him, to test him. He saw in Henry the key to everything he had ever dreamed of. But he also saw the darkness, the profound, nihilistic rage that fueled the boy's abilities. He realized, with a chilling clarity, that Henry was not a tool that could be wielded. He was a monster that could not be tamed. Fearing the power he could not control, Brenner made a decision that would define the entire future of his program. He decided to suppress it. He developed a small implant, a device he called Soteria, and had it surgically placed in Henry's neck. It was a psychic dampener, a leash, a way to put a god on a chain. At the same time, He took Henry's DNA. If he could not control the original, he would try to replicate him. He would use Henry's genetic material as the blueprint for a new generation of psychic children. Children he could raise from birth. Children he could mold, shape, and control in a way he never could with Henry. Henry Creel, the boy, was erased. He was given a new name, a new number, 01. And then he was given a new job. Stripped of his full power, he became an orderly at the lab, a quiet, helpful, and seemingly harmless young man in a white uniform. It was the perfect cage, the perfect camouflage. The first and most powerful of Papa's children was now hiding in plain sight, a wolf disguised as a sheepdog, a patient, silent predator waiting for the day he could reclaim his power and burn Brenner's entire pathetic experiment to the ground. With the monstrous potential of Henry Creel now contained and his genetic blueprint secured, Dr. Brenner began the true work of his life's ambition, the creation of a family. This was the rise of the program itself, the establishment of a faction of children stolen from their lives and brought to the lab to be raised as psychic weapons. The process was a chilling blend of paternal care and clinical cruelty. Brenner's agents would identify gifted children from all over the world. Children like Kali Prasad, a young girl from London with the unique ability to cast illusions. They would be taken, their pasts erased, their parents left to a lifetime of unanswered questions. They would arrive at Hawkins' lab, terrified and alone, and they would be given two things: a new, simple name, a number, and a new father, Papa. The heart of their new world was the Rainbow Room. On the surface, it was a child's paradise. A vibrant rainbow was painted on the wall, a symbol of hope and wonder in a place that had none. The floor was a checkerboard of black and white tiles, a stark, orderly landscape for their games. There were toys, chalkboards, a comfortable sitting area. It was designed to be a school, a nursery, a home. But it was a beautiful, meticulously crafted lie. The Rainbow Room was a laboratory, a training ground, a gilded cage. The toys were tools for their psychic exercises. The games were tests of their abilities. The children were not students. They were subjects. The faction was a collection of these numbered children, a strange, broken family of rivals. They were all siblings, but they were also competitors, all vying for the one thing that mattered in their small, colorless world: Papa's approval. Brenner was a master of manipulation. He would reward them for success with a kind word, a gentle touch, a rare treat. He would punish them for failure or for defiance with the chilling, absolute cold of his disappointment, or worse, with long, terrifying hours in a dark, solitary confinement cell. He was their god, the sun around which their entire existence revolved. And walking among them, a quiet, smiling figure in a white uniform, was the orderly. Number 1, Henry Creel. He played his part perfectly. He was the gentle one, the one who would offer a kind word, who would mediate their squabbles, who seemed to be the only other person in the lab who understood them. He was their secret friend, their confidant. But it was all a performance. Inside, he was watching, studying, waiting. He saw these children not as siblings, but as flawed, inferior copies of himself. He felt a deep, profound contempt for them, and for the man who had created them in his image while keeping him the original, on a leash. The first major conflict of this new era was a silent, cold war between creator and creation. Brenner believed he had successfully contained his monster, that he had turned his greatest threat into a useful, manageable tool. He was using Henry as a shepherd for his new flock, utterly blind to the fact that the wolf was still there, just beneath the surface, silently plotting his revenge. The aftermath of this containment was the golden age of the program. For years, the lab operated with a quiet, efficient rhythm. The children grew, their powers developed, and Brenner's research progressed. The Rainbow Room was a place of routine, of tests and games, of small victories and quiet punishments. It was a seemingly stable, controlled environment, but it was a stability built on a lie, a peace maintained by a psychic leash. And the one person in the lab who knew the full, terrifying truth of it all was the quiet orderly who brought the children their afternoon snacks, a patient predator biding his time, waiting for a child to come along who was powerful enough to finally break his chains. The meticulous, ordered world of the Rainbow Room, the world that Brenner had so carefully constructed, was thrown into a state of beautiful, chaotic disarray with the arrival of one small, terrified girl, number 11. Her power, a direct and potent inheritance from her mother's time in the MK Ultra program, was unlike anything Brenner had seen since Henry Creel. It was raw, untamed, and immense. This was the beginning of the end for the lab's quiet era, the introduction of a variable that would ultimately lead to its destruction. While the other children, like Kaylee, number 8, had specific, more subtle abilities, in her case, the power to create illusions, 11's was a blunt instrument of pure, telekinetic force. She could crush a soda can with a glance, a feat that made Brenner's eyes gleam with a familiar, proprietary pride. He saw in her the potential for a new number 1, a weapon that was not just a replica, but an improvement, one he could mold from the very beginning. The conflict began almost immediately, but it was not a conflict with Brenner. It was with the other children. The Rainbow Room was a competitive, hierarchical society, and 11's prodigious power made her an immediate threat to the established order. The other children, led by a cruel, arrogant boy named number 2, saw her not as a sister, but as a rival. They ganged up on her, bullying her, taunting her for her perceived weakness when she hesitated to use her powers for cruel tasks. Her refusal to harm a cat, an act of innate compassion, was seen as a failure, earning her both Brenner's disappointment and the other children's scorn. The aftermath of these early encounters was a profound and painful isolation for 11. She was an outsider in a family of outsiders, a child who was too powerful and too gentle for the brutal world she had been born into. She would retreat into herself, her only solace the quiet moments she could find alone. It was in this state of lonely vulnerability that she found a friend, an ally, the one person in the lab who seemed to understand her. The quiet, kind, orderly Henry Creel, the hidden wolf, had been waiting for a child like her for years. He saw her power, but more importantly, he saw her pain, her isolation, her deep-seated anger at Brenner and her tormentors. She was the key. He began a slow, masterful campaign of manipulation, a secret friendship that unfolded in the quiet corners of the lab. He would find her after a particularly brutal training session or a cruel encounter with number 2, and he would offer her words of comfort, of validation. He didn't tell her to suppress her feelings as Brenner did. He told her to use them. He became her secret teacher. He taught her that the source of her power was not in control, but in emotion. He told her to find a memory that made her sad or angry, and to channel it. He was teaching her his own dark methodology, reframing it as a tool for her own empowerment. He was sharpening her into a weapon, not for Brenner, but for himself. This secret friendship became the central conflict of the lab's final years. It was a proxy war between Brenner and number 1, fought for the soul of number 11. Brenner tried to control her through discipline and fear. Henry sought to liberate her through anger and a shared sense of victimhood. The aftermath of this grooming process was the forging of an unbreakable and ultimately fatal bond. 11 came to see the orderly as her only true family, her protector, the one person she could trust in a world of pain and lies. And he, in turn, saw her as the perfect, unwitting instrument of his own liberation. The stakes for the Rainbow Room had been redefined. It was no longer just a training ground. It was the battlefield for a civil war, and its most powerful student was about to choose a side. The years of quiet, simmering tension in the Rainbow Room was a long, cold war that was about to turn hot. This lost era was, from Brenner's perspective, the program's most productive period. The children were growing, their powers were developing, and the data he was collecting was invaluable. He saw himself as a pioneer, a father guiding his gifted children towards their full potential. The reality, from the children's perspective, was a monotonous, sterile existence, a life of endless tests and the constant, crushing pressure to please their papa. The rebuilding phase of the lab's story was actually its slow, unperceived unraveling. The daily life of the children was a strange, paradoxical mix of the mundane and the extraordinary. They had a set schedule: breakfast, lessons, training, playtime in the Rainbow Room, dinner, bed. It was the rhythm of a boarding school, but their lessons were about controlling their psychic abilities, and their games were often cruel, competitive tests. Brenner would have them play a game with a heavy metal disc, using their minds to push it back and forth across a table, a psychic version of air hockey. The winner would receive a rare smile, a word of praise. The loser would be met with his cold, silent disappointment. This constant competition fostered an environment of jealousy and resentment among the children. They were not a family. They were a group of rivals, all desperate for the same thing. The trauma of their existence was a quiet, constant hum beneath the surface of their controlled lives. It was in the moments of failure, in the lonely hours spent in the dark confinement cell, in the ever-present knowledge that they were not normal, that they were prisoners. Their secrets were the memories of the lives they had been stolen from, memories that Brenner actively tried to suppress, encouraging them to forget the world outside, to see him as their only family. It was in this environment that number 8, Kali, rebuilt herself. Unlike the other children, Kali had vivid memories of her life before the lab, of her parents in London. This secret, this memory of a different kind of love, became her armor and her weapon. It fueled her rage and gave her a purpose beyond just surviving Brenner's program. She became a silent rebel, a protector of the younger children. She would use her illusion-casting powers for small acts of defiance and comfort, creating a fleeting image of a butterfly to calm a crying child, a momentary crack of beauty in the sterile facade. Her isolation was profound. She was the only one who remembered a real family, and this knowledge set her apart, making her both a leader and a loner. She was rebuilding her own identity in secret, an identity based not on the number on her wrist, but on the memory of the name she had been born with. While Kaylee was rebuilding her own quiet resistance, the orderly, Henry Creel, was rebuilding his grand plan for escape and destruction. His life as an orderly was a masterclass in patience. He performed his duties with a placid obedience, all while cataloging the lab's weaknesses, studying the children, and waiting for his moment. His secret was the full, horrifying truth of his own past, a truth he kept perfectly hidden behind a mask of gentle servitude. He was rebuilding his strength in the shadows, learning to work around the edges of the Soteria's influence, and most importantly, he was forging the key to his own liberation, his relationship with 11. He saw her struggles, her isolation, and he exploited them perfectly. He was rebuilding her in his own image, teaching her to embrace her anger, to see her power not as a gift, but as a mark of superiority. This lost era was the quiet, meticulous setting of a time bomb. While Brenner saw progress, his two most powerful subjects, 1 and 11, were forging a secret, unholy alliance that was destined to burn his entire world to the ground. The quiet, orderly hum of the Hawkins lab was finally shattered by the reemergence of its original monster, Henry Creel. His new idea, his grand design for liberation, was no longer a distant dream. It was a tangible, achievable plan, and its success rested entirely on the shoulders of his young, powerful, and completely unwitting accomplice, 11. The first signs of his active campaign were subtle but significant. He began to escalate his manipulation of the other children, subtly using his own muted telepathic abilities to amplify their jealousy and fear of 11. He was a master of psychological warfare, turning the already tense environment of the Rainbow Room into a powder keg. He would orchestrate scenarios where number 2 and his cronies would corner and bully 11, pushing her to her breaking point. This served two purposes. It further isolated 11, making her even more dependent on him as her only friend, and it forced her to use her powers in fits of rage, honing her into the raw, powerful weapon he needed her to be. The suspense of this period was in these quiet, cruel moments of manipulation. We see him comforting a crying 11 after she has psychically thrown one of her bullies across the room, his face a mask of sympathy, while his mind is a whirlwind of cold calculation. He was not her friend, he was her weapons instructor, and the target was the system that imprisoned them both. He began to build a narrative for her, a story of shared victimhood. He told her about himself, a carefully edited version of his past. He told her that he was just like her, that Brenner had taken him as a boy, that his own powers had been feared and suppressed by a papa who was not a father, but a monster. He was creating a new, shared reality for them, a reality where they were the heroes and Brenner was the villain. The re-emergence of his true will was a quiet coup, a rebellion being fought in whispers and secret meetings. He showed her a way out, a hidden ventilation shaft, a physical path to a freedom she had never dared to dream of. He made her believe that escape was her idea, her desire, when in reality she was just another piece in his long, patient game. The new threat to the lab was not a creature from another dimension. It was the one that had been there all along, the one they had foolishly believed they had tamed. The final brilliant stroke of his plan was the revelation of the Soteria chip. He showed it to her, a small scar on the back of his neck, and told her a devastating lie. He said it was a tracker, a leash, that as long as it was inside him, Brenner would always be able to find them. He told her that for them to be free, it had to be removed. He placed his own manufactured vulnerability and their supposed shared future directly in her hands. He had created a crisis that only she could solve, a moral test that had only one possible answer for a child who had come to love and trust him completely. He had turned Brenner's greatest asset into the instrument of his own liberation, and the countdown to the lab's destruction had begun. The secret alliance between Henry Creel and 11 was the new, unspoken order of the Rainbow Room, a faction of two that was about to declare war on the established regime of Dr. Brenner. This new order, however, was a pyramid scheme of manipulation, with Henry at the top and 11 as his primary and only investor. The internal conflicts of this period were not between the two allies, but within 11 herself, a battle for her soul that she didn't even know she was fighting. The social dynamic of the lab was now a complex web of secrets. To the rest of the world, to Brenner and the other children, 11 was a quiet, powerful, and sometimes volatile subject. But in her secret meetings with the orderly, she was a student, an apprentice to a master she did not understand. He became her true papa, the one who seemed to truly see her, to value her for her strength. He taught her to see her tormentors, the other children, not as siblings to be pitied, but as obstacles to be overcome. He was systematically dismantling the moral framework Brenner had tried, however cruelly, to instill in her, the idea of control, of restraint, and was replacing it with his own philosophy of righteous, unrestrained power. The chemistry he created between them was one of profound and profoundly dangerous trust. She saw him as her savior, the one who would lead her to freedom. He saw her as a key, a biological lockpick that could open the door to his cage. The arguments that occurred were not between them, but were internal debates within 11 that Henry would expertly resolve. When she expressed fear about her own power, about the harm she could cause, he would reframe it for her. He would tell her that her power was a gift, that those who were hurt by it were weak and deserved their fate. He was teaching her his own nihilistic, predatory worldview, dressing it up in the language of empowerment and liberation. The ultimate test of this new order, the moment that would break all other trusts, was his plea for her to remove the Soteria chip. This was the culmination of his long grooming process. He had created a scenario where her act of helping him was also an act of rebellion against the father figure who had controlled her entire life. The internal conflict for 11 was immense. To help her only friend, she had to betray her papa. But Henry had done his work too well. He had so completely poisoned her against Brenner, had so perfectly positioned himself as her only true ally, that her choice was a foregone conclusion. The broken trust was not with her friend, but with the entire system that had raised her. She trusted Henry completely, and so, in a moment of desperate, concentrated effort, she focused her mind, and with a psychic wrench, she ripped the chip from his neck. The new social strife that this act unleashed was not social. It was apocalyptic. The moment the chip was gone, the new order, the secret faction of two, was dissolved. The mask of the kind, gentle orderly fell away, and for the first time, 11 saw the true face of her friend, and it was the face of a monster. The chemistry of trust was replaced by the physics of pure, terrifying power, and the internal conflicts within 11 were about to become a very real, very bloody, external one. The Hawkins lab massacre was the critical turning point, the catastrophic event that was both the bloody end of Brenner's program and the horrifying birth of the story's greatest villain. It was a symphony of psychic violence, orchestrated by a newly unleashed Henry Creel and witnessed by his horrified, unwitting accomplice, 11. The narration of this event begins with the sound of the Soteria chip clattering to the floor of the Rainbow Room. For a moment, there was silence. Then, a change. The kind, gentle face of the orderly, the face 11 had come to trust completely, contorted not in pain, but in a look of pure, ecstatic triumph. The dam had broken. Years of suppressed rage and power flooded back into him in a single, overwhelming wave. The tactical failure was Brenner's, a failure of imagination so profound it was suicidal. He had seen the wolf every day and had only ever seen the sheep's clothing. The villain's trap was sprung, not on 11, but on everyone else in the lab. The alarms began to blare, a frantic, useless cry against a storm that had already made landfall. Henry, now fully restored as number 1, began his cleansing. He moved through the lab with a chilling, balletic grace, a phantom of death in a blood-spattered white uniform. He didn't touch anyone. He simply looked at them. The guards in the hallway froze, their bodies lifted into the air as if by an unseen hand. Their bones snapped with a series of sickening, wet cracks. Their bodies twisted into grotesque, unnatural shapes before being slammed against the walls with the force of a car crash. He moved from room to room, his face a mask of serene, focused fury. He killed the scientists, the technicians, their screams a brief, sharp counterpoint to the wail of the alarms. The most horrifying scene of the massacre took place in the Rainbow Room itself. The other children, his siblings, cowered in a corner, their own psychic abilities useless against the sheer, overwhelming force of the original. He saw them not with pity, but with a cold, detached contempt. They were flawed copies, a testament to Brenner's failed experiment. He showed them no mercy. He killed them all, one by one, with the same brutal, bone-breaking telekinesis, their small bodies crumpling to the floor amidst the colorful, childish toys. The rainbow on the wall was spattered with their blood. 11 who had been hidden away, emerged to find this scene of unimaginable carnage. The man who had been her only friend stood in the center of the room, surrounded by the bodies of her brothers and sisters. The shocking revelation was not just that he was a killer, but the philosophy behind his actions. He turned to her, a faint, condescending smile on his lips, and he explained himself. He told her of his nihilistic worldview, of humanity as a plague, of his desire to bring a new, truer order to a broken world. He saw himself not as a murderer, but as a savior, a necessary predator. And then he extended a blood-stained hand. "Join me," he offered. "Together, we can reshape the world." This was his true goal, not just to escape, but to recruit her, his only perceived equal. The catastrophic event was not just the death of dozens of people. It was the birth of a war that would begin in this room, a war between two gods, one fueled by hate, and one who was about to discover the true and far more powerful source of her own strength. The massacre in the Rainbow Room was not the fall of Henry Creel. In his own mind, it was his glorious, righteous ascension. The true fall, the transformation that would turn him from a human monster into a supernatural one, came in the moments that followed. In the blood-soaked playroom, he made his offer to 11, an invitation to join him as a god queen in the new world he intended to create. His internal monologue was one of supreme, unshakable confidence. He had demonstrated his power, he had articulated his philosophy, and he saw their alliance as the next logical, inevitable step. Her rejection of his offer, her horrified, tearful no, was an intellectual and emotional shock to his system. He could not comprehend it. Her choice for compassion, for the weak, sentimental world he despised, was a betrayal of her own superior nature. His final choice in the face of this defiance was a simple one, dictated by his own predatory logic. If she would not be his partner, she would be his victim. The psychic duel that erupted between them was a physical manifestation of their opposing worldviews. Henry attacked with a cold, precise, and overwhelming rage. He was the master, the original, his control over his abilities honed by a lifetime of focused hate. He threw 11 around the room like a rag doll, her own powers flickering and failing against his superior strength and experience. He began to break her bones, to crush her, intending to make her his final, most significant victim. But as she was pinned against the wall, her life fading, an external pressure of a different kind came to her aid. A memory. It was not a memory of anger or sadness. The two emotions he had taught her were the source of power. It was a memory of pure, unconditional love. She remembered the moment of her own birth, the image of her mother, Terry Ives, reaching for her, a memory she had absorbed through their brief psychic contact. This memory unlocked a different kind of power within her, a force that Henry, in his cold, nihilistic world, could not understand and had never accounted for. Fueled by this love, she let out a final, desperate scream. A wave of raw, incandescent energy erupted from her, a power that was not controlled and precise like his, but wild, chaotic, and infinitely stronger. It shattered his hold on her. His internal monologue shifted from triumphant rage to stunned disbelief, and then, for the first time, to a flicker of something he had never truly felt before: fear. She rose to her feet, her hand outstretched, and focused all of this new, love-fueled energy on him. The force didn't just push him, it began to erase the world around him. The wall behind him cracked, not with physical force, but with a tearing of reality itself. A swirling, chaotic vortex of red lightning and black energy opened behind him, the first ever gate to the upside down. His fall was both metaphorical and brutally literal. He was sucked into the dimensional wound, his body tumbling through a primordial, chaotic abyss. The transformation was instantaneous and agonizing. The raw energy of the upside down, a dimension without a mind, was drawn to his own immense psychic presence. It struck him, not like a weapon, but like a forge. Bolts of red lightning seared his flesh, burning away his humanity, melting his features. The native, vine-like tendrils of the dimension were drawn to him, wrapping around him, burrowing into his body, fusing his biology with their own. The fall of Henry Creel, the human monster, was complete. And in the fiery, chaotic crucible of this new, dark world, the being known as Vecna was born. The banishment of Henry Creel was the introduction of the story's true, overarching antagonist. He was no longer a human boy, but a new, monstrous entity, his consciousness now fused with the very fabric of an entire dimension. His arrival in the Upside Down was, for that mindless, chaotic realm, a moment of profound, world-altering significance. It had found its brain. The newly christened Vecna, his body a grotesque, burned and vine-covered parody of its former self, did not see a prison. He saw a kingdom. He spent his first years, or what passed for years, in that timeless place, exploring his new domain and consolidating his power. He reached out with his mind and found he could not only connect with, but completely dominate the native creatures, the demogorgons, the demobats. They were no longer just animals. They were now his soldiers, extensions of his own will. This was the birth of the hive mind, the greatest weapon in his new arsenal. The trajectory of the story, from this point forward, was driven by his singular, unwavering goal to return to the world that had cast him out and reshape it in his own dark, orderly image. The Upside Down became his laboratory and his factory. He began to sculpt it, to impose his will upon its chaotic landscape, meticulously recreating a dark, decaying mirror of Hawkins, with the spectral Creel house as its capital. This was a strategic decision, the creation of a familiar battlefield for a war he knew was coming. His first major campaign was a long, patient one. He waited for a new, stable gate to be opened, a wound in reality created by his old nemesis, 11. When she finally made contact with the Demogorgon and tore a hole in the wall of Hawkins' lab, he was ready. This was the second major conflict of the lab's story, the invasion. Vecna, now a master puppeteer, sent his first soldier, a single Demogorgon, through the gate. Its mission was not one of random chaos, but of strategic terror and reconnaissance. It abducted Will Byers, a boy Vecna sensed was psychically sensitive, a potential host. It killed Barb Holland, an act designed to sow fear and confusion. The heroes of Hawkins were now fighting a war against an enemy they couldn't see, a monster whose strings were being pulled by a hidden, intelligent master. The lab itself, the place of his own creation and imprisonment, became the epicenter of this new conflict. The gate in its sub-basement was the beachhead for his invasion, Vecna's methodology was one of a patient, brilliant, and utterly ruthless general. He used the Demogorgon as a physical weapon and Will Byers as a psychic one, using the boy's connection to his mother to manipulate the world he had left behind. He underestimated the resilience of his enemies, their ability to band together, and most of all, the power of 11. Her destruction of his Demogorgon and the rescue of Will Byers was a significant defeat, but it was also a learning experience. The conflict taught him that a single soldier was not enough. He needed an army, and he had found the perfect way to build one. A seed of his own consciousness now planted deep inside Will Byers. The devastating loss that defined the first era of Hawkins' lab was not a single death, but the complete and utter failure of Brenner's grand ambition, a failure that culminated in the Hawkins lab massacre. The loss was the death of an idea, the idea that power like this could ever be truly controlled. The narrative of this loss is the story of Brenner's hubris. He believed he had successfully contained his first and most dangerous subject, number one. He believed he had created a superior, more controllable version in number 11. He was wrong on both counts. The slaughter in the Rainbow Room was the brutal, bloody evidence of his failure. All of his other children, his years of research, his entire life's work, all of it was extinguished in a matter of minutes by the very monster he had kept as a pet. The emotional weight of this for Brenner would have been a cocktail of terror, failure, and a strange, perverse sense of scientific awe. He had been proven right about the existence of this power, but devastatingly wrong about his ability to command it. The sacrifice that led to this was 11's own innocence. In her desire to help her only friend, she had unwittingly unleashed a demon. The guilt of this act, the memory of the massacre, was a trauma so profound that her own mind buried it, a secret she would carry with her for years. The final devastating loss that followed this was the mind of Terry Ives. When Terry, in a desperate, heroic act of maternal love, stormed the lab to rescue her daughter, Brenner was faced with a choice. He could not allow the truth of his failed program to get out. So, he made the decision to sacrifice Terry's sanity. The electroshock therapy that left her a catatonic, broken woman was a final, cruel act of self-preservation. He sacrificed a mother's mind to protect the secrets of his own failures. The lab, once a place of supposed progress, was now a charnel house, a place of ghosts, its rainbow-painted walls a sick joke in a room filled with the memory of death. The psychological fallout from the massacre and the opening of the first gate was a profound shift in the lab's entire purpose. The dream of creation was dead. The new reality was one of containment. The lab was no longer a school for gifted children. It was a prison for a dimensional wound. The emotional fallout for Brenner was a hardening of his resolve, a doubling down on his obsession. He had lost everything except two things: the gate in his basement and his most powerful subject, 11. He channeled all of his focus, all of his resources into them. He saw the Upside Down not as a mistake to be sealed, but as a new frontier to be explored, a new source of power to be harnessed. And he saw 11 not as a daughter to be nurtured, but as the only tool he had left to do it. His treatment of her became harsher, his methods more desperate. He forced her into the sensory deprivation tank again and again, pushing her to make contact with the creatures on the other side to map this new, dark world. The morale within the lab, among the surviving scientists and guards, would have been at an all-time low. They were no longer pioneers. They were zookeepers in a demon's zoo, their lives in constant danger, their work now a grim, terrifying exercise in damage control. The strategy shifted from psychic espionage against the Russians to a desperate internal battle against a threat they had created and could not comprehend. The relationship between Brenner and Eleven was now one of a master and a tool. Their bond, once a twisted form of love, now stripped down to its bare, utilitarian essentials. He needed her to explore his new, dark kingdom, and she, a traumatized, isolated child, had no choice but to obey. With the original program in ruins and a permanent wound to another dimension bleeding in its basement, the lab entered its final, desperate phase. The preparation for the end was Brenner's monomaniacal obsession with the creature he now knew inhabited the Upside Down. The rallying the troops was a grim, fear-driven mobilization of his remaining scientific and security staff. Their new, singular mission was to understand and, if possible, control the Demogorgon. The multi-part plan was one of pure, reckless scientific curiosity. They would use 11 as a psychic lure, a beacon to draw the creature closer. They would use her to make direct, unshielded contact, to try and communicate with it, to study it. The character talks before the storm would have been Brenner's quiet, intense monologues to a terrified 11, telling her how important she was, how this was the culmination of all their work. His voice a soothing, manipulative balm over a mission of pure, suicidal folly. He was a man who had flown too close to the sun, been burned, and had decided the only solution was to fly directly into it. The final push was the last experiment. He placed 11 in the sensory deprivation tank, the bath, for one final fateful journey into the void. The tension in the control room would have been immense, the scientists watching their monitors, their faces a mixture of terror and excitement. Brenner, calm and focused, would have guided 11, his voice in her ear, pushing her, demanding more. "Find it," he would have commanded. "Make contact." He was a captain steering his ship directly into a hurricane, convinced he could chart its winds. The final confrontation and climax of the lab's original story was the moment the hurricane made landfall. As 11, floating in the dark, silent abyss of the tank, reached out with her mind and touched the consciousness of the Demogorgon, the barrier between worlds, already so thin, finally shattered. The connection was not just psychic, it became physical. From the perspective of the horrified scientists in the observation room, the solid concrete wall behind the tank began to crack and bleed. A glistening, organic, pulsating wound in reality tore itself open. This was the gate. And from its horrifying fleshy maw, the Demogorgon, a creature of nightmare, stepped through. The climax was a symphony of chaos and screaming. Alarms blared, their electronic shrieks a useless counterpoint to the creature's guttural, terrifying roar. The scientists, the men and women who had watched this all unfold with a detached, clinical curiosity, were now a part of the experiment. Their lab coats, no protection against the claws and teeth of the thing they had summoned. The creature, disoriented and enraged, began to hunt, its primal instincts unleashed in the sterile, white corridors of the lab. The final confrontation was between Brenner's ambition and the brutal physical reality of the consequences. He had found his monster, and it was about to consume him and his entire world. The immediate aftermath of the Demogorgon's arrival was a scene of pure, unadulterated chaos and carnage. The lab, once a place of quiet, orderly horror, was now a loud, bloody abattoir. The creature was loose, a predator in a sealed cage with its prey, and it was systematically tearing its way through the facility's staff. The resolution, from the lab's perspective, was its own destruction, but from the perspective of our story's reluctant hero, 11, it was a moment of liberation. In the pandemonium, as Brenner and his security forces were desperately trying to contain the monster they had unleashed, she saw her chance. The complex security systems, the watchful eyes, the constant control, all of it was shattered by the sheer, overwhelming violence of the Demogorgon. She slipped out of the tank, a small, ghost-like figure in a hospital gown, and in the confusion, she ran. Her escape was the quiet, central resolution to the years of imprisonment. She was a weapon that had finally, catastrophically, misfired, and in the chaos of the explosion, she was set free. She left behind a lab in flames, a father figure about to be consumed by his own creation, and a bleeding open wound to another world. The reunion that this event would trigger was not with her family at the lab, but with a new family she was about to find, a fellowship of boys on bikes who would give her a new home and a new purpose. The loss was, for Brenner, everything. His research, his staff, his control, and ultimately his life, seemingly lost to the creature he had so desperately wanted to meet. The victory was a Pyrrhic one for the lab. They had made contact, but a total one for the monster they had set loose on the world. The true, tragic cost of the Hawkins lab experiment was not just the lives lost in the initial massacre and the Demogorgon's rampage, but the permanent, bleeding wound it left in the fabric of reality itself. The gate in the sub-basement was the ultimate, horrifying price of Brenner's ambition. It was a self-sustaining portal to a dimension of death and decay, a cancer that had metastasized in the heart of the town. The personal losses were staggering. There was the loss of the children, the ones who died in the massacre, their potential extinguished, their lives a footnote in a failed experiment. There was the loss of Terry Ives's sanity, a mother's mind sacrificed to protect a terrible secret. And there was the loss of 11's childhood, a life of innocence she could never reclaim. The wider environmental and political consequences were a massive, ongoing cover-up. The Department of Energy, the shadowy organization that funded Brenner, swooped in to contain the disaster, not to heal it, but to hide it. The lab was transformed from a research facility into a military quarantine zone. The official story, a chemical spill, was concocted, a flimsy lie to placate a town that was about to be haunted by a monster it didn't even know existed. Unraveling the true cost reveals a story not of scientific progress, but of profound, irreversible damage. Brenner had not unlocked the next stage of human evolution. He had simply opened a door to a new form of extinction. The cost was the end of Hawkins's innocence the beginning of a secret war that would claim lives, shatter families, and prove that the greatest monsters are often the ones who believe they are doing good. The long-term legacy of the Hawkins National Laboratory is a curse, a permanent stain on the town and on the world. The impact of its work did not end with the escape of 11 or the death of Brenner. That was only the beginning. The new status quo it created was a world where the barrier between our dimension and a hostile, predatory one was irrevocably compromised. The lab, in its final form, became a fortress, a grim military installation whose sole purpose was to stand guard over the hellmouth it had created. Its legacy is the gate, a wound that would be closed, reopened, and become the focal point of a multi-year war. The lasting scars are on every character in our story. For 11, the lab is the source of her power and her pain, a place of trauma she would be forced to return to again and again to find the strength to fight the very monsters it had unleashed. For Will Byers and all the subsequent victims, the lab's legacy is the existence of the creatures that would hunt and possess them. For Hopper and Joyce, it is the source of a conspiracy they would have to fight for the rest of their lives. The impact of the Rainbow Room is a generation of broken, powerful children scattered to the winds. It's Kaylee, number 8, whose entire life becomes a crusade of vengeance against the men who created her. It's Henry Creel, number 1, whose banishment transformed him into Vecna, the ultimate villain, making the lab the literal and figurative creator of its own devil. The lab's work permanently changed the world. It introduced a new apex predator into our ecosystem and gave it a door. The lasting scar is the knowledge, shared by a precious few, that we are not alone, and that the things that live in the dark are not just real, but were invited in. The Rainbow Room was a beautiful lie, a cage of bright colors and quiet cruelty built by a man who saw children as keys to unlock a new kind of power. It began as a scientist's dream, a controlled experiment to shepherd humanity into its next great evolution. But in his cold, clinical pursuit of control, he created a monster he could not tame, and in her fear, a hero he could not break. He sought to build weapons, but he only ever succeeded in building ghosts, the ghosts of the children he stole, the ghosts of the family he destroyed, and the ghosts of the monsters he let in from the dark. The lab's story is a quiet, gentle lullaby about the birth of a nightmare, a testament to the idea that the most terrifying doors are the ones we open ourselves with the very best of intentions. But as we look back on the empty, blood-stained checkerboard floor of that silent room, one final, chilling question remains. Did the lab create its own monsters through its cruelty and its ambition? Or did it simply open the door for the ones that were already there, hiding in the quiet, dark corners of the human heart?